This is Black Market Leadership, the underground resource for disruptors and status quo breakers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Black Market Leadership. I am very excited today. We have a special guest appearance by a friend of mine, TS Ransdell. He is the author of the trilogy, people, The Last Marine. So what do we call you on this podcast? TS, Travis?
You can call me Travis. That's my first name. Yeah.
Well, Travis, tell the audience a little bit about The Last Marine.
Well, The Last Marine was a concept I came up with while I was still serving the Marine Corps about 30 years ago. And it was notion of a military culture and a civilian culture that have basically kind of grown out of touch with each other. They no longer really reflect similar values. And as I kind of evolved in my head over the last 30 years, I came up with a story where basically, what if culture, the American culture, or our counterculture evolves so much that they view American military culture as evil, as a threat, as something to be destroyed. The very military culture that they depend on for their own safety, security, freedom to believe or to evolve that thought. So thus you get the notion of the Last Marine. It's a near future dystopian war novel. The United States is embroiled in a very tough fight with China, while the culture in the United States, or the civilian culture that stays home, that doesn't fight, seeks then to undermine the military culture. So the military has kind of a conflict, not only with the Chinese, but then also with a government bureaucracy that the civilian population has taken over. And
you've received amazing accolades. You had the one actor, Dale,
Captain Dale Dye.
Wow, yeah, from Platoon. I mean, he's in so many movies. He always plays the tough. He always plays like the tough colonel, always chewing people's ears.
Salty warrior. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's got the credentials to back that up. He's lived that. So
you had a great testimonial from him, and then recently you told me you had was a senior officer of Force Recon. Talk about how much he loves the trilogy.
Retired gunny. Yeah, from the second Force Reconnaissance Company Association.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. So audience, you got to go on Amazon, get The Last Marine. I got the trilogy. I haven't got them signed, which is really cool. It's a great story, and boy, I've read a lot of the feedback on Amazon, and people are talking about you must be a mind reader because you're writing about things which seem to be coming out every day in the news.
Yeah, more than what I really ever intended. I try to take the current trajectory as I saw it that our nation's at in our culture war, and kind of try to predict where I saw the logical conclusion to this. And so there are a lot of things that have kind of played out similar to the events in the book.
Yeah. It's so audience, you got to check it out. And so today we have Travis on because Travis recommended a book to me a couple months ago, The Boxer Rebellion by Diana Preston, and couldn't put it down. First of all, I knew nothing about the Boxer Rebellion. I think I told you the only thing I knew about the Boxer Rebellion was the scene from Buffy and the Vampire Slayer. Spike was in the Boxer Rebellion. So I had that image in my head. And I was like, okay, it's a small rebellion. I really didn't know much about it. And what's so interesting is I'm at Galvanize one day and I talked to Tyson, who works there. He's a former Marine. I told him about the book I'm reading. And he's like, oh, yeah, the boxers. They teach us that in the Marine Corps boot camp. I'm like, they did? So he knew all these stories of this fascinating history. I finished the book. You read it. I read it. And I was blown away. This is a history that I had no clue. I really had no clue. Exciting, brutal. So for the audience here, Travis and I thought, let's discuss the Boxer Rebellion, not in totally historical terms. We're not totally investigative scientists about the subject, but let's talk about the story. There's some things that pop out. I mean, to me in regards to chaos. I know some things popped out to you. So that's what we want to do here. And before we jump into this, what was your general impression of the book? Just the book itself. Good read, easy read. How would you rate it?
I thought it was a good read. Easy for the amount of detail and the chronological order that she goes in, laying this out really kind of event by event. It plays out. It reminds me of those old catastrophe movies that were popular in the 70s, of like all these different people, kind of different story threads coming together. She lays it out in chronological order, a lot of detail. And it'd be very easy, because I've read other books on the Boxer Rebellion where I get kind of lost in what the author is saying or putting the information together. But I thought she laid it out very well. It's a very easy read for what the book accomplishes.
I totally agree. And there are a lot of people in the book. And for the audience here, I'm not going to go over a lot of names. I don't remember some of the names. I remember some of the origins or what they were doing. There's a lot of detail, but you're right, man. I don't think I had to go back to read a section multiple times at all. I think it's went straight through. And you're right. There are a lot of components. So for the audience here, let's just give a little background. This what the year is 1900. It's a turn of the century. It's the brand new 20th century. You have all these Western powers who have legations, diplomatic residences in the city of Peking, the capital of China. Right. There's a rebellion. There's a rebellion by a group called the Boxers, and we'll go into this. But there's a rebellion. In essence, this story is this rebellion is countrywide, and they lay siege on these different nationalities, their diplomatic homes. It's called the Legation Quarter, 3/4 of a mile long. And in it are the British, the Americans, the Germans, the Japanese, the Russians, the French. Can't forget the French, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, the French, yeah.
So in essence, the Boxers lay siege to this quarter. There's the I'm called allies. The Westerners actually tried to rescue them. The first time it's a failure. The second time it's a success. And the third act is when not only do they rescue the Westerners, but the Westerners really take over Peking, and the entire emperor, their empress, is routed. She leaves. So it's almost like an unofficial war. Is that basically it? Siege, rescue, and rout. Is that basically the story in 3 acts?
Yeah, no, that sounds pretty accurate for this whole event. Yeah.
So that's really the story here. And what Preston does in this book for audience, what she does is she goes through the stories and what's it like to be besieged oh my God, it's June, July, and August, right?
Yeah. About it's roughly it's 55 days that they're held up in the legation's diplomatic quarter of Peking, which is just outside the Forbidden City. It's hot. Yeah, it's hot. It's dirty. And the only supplies they have was what was in their legation's quarter. That's what they're going to live off of.
And what's really interesting about the sieges to me is it's not just the Westerners, it's also the Christian converts, the Chinese who have been converted into Christianity. They come in this these quarters as well.
They do, yeah. That's their only place of refuge.
Yeah. So you have limited food, you have very limited ammo, you have very limited security forces, and we're talking about thousands and thousands of Chinese Boxers supported by the Chinese army. They literally siege this area, and for 55 days, the Westerners and their Chinese converts fight off these just relentless attacks, and that's really the story. And it's so. Well, I feel like I really rushed that, but that's what it is in the thumbnail, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Overall, I say that you've nailed it.
So reading this book, what's the theme? What do you think the theme is? What sticks out to you? Is this a story of survival, of thriving, of conquering nations? What is this?
What stuck out to me was that it is a story of survival. You've got people, particularly what I found interesting was the juxtaposition, the allies, different cultures, different agendas, different world perspectives that are able then to unite under some pretty strong leadership, primarily by the British delegation, which they're the largest and most powerful delegation out of that group. But they're able to unite under a common sense of mission, where the Chinese, who initially seem like they've got everything going for them, and they're not able to really unite. They're not able to carry it through. And in fact, when it does start, events start to not go in their favor, it really disintegrates and falls apart for them. So what looked like could potentially be like a first world war kind of disintegrates into really kind of a minor, historically speaking, what is a kind of a minor and often forgotten conflict of the 20th century.
Yeah, it's a little I don't know, blip on the historical radar, but it's fascinating because first of all, when you read this, the Americans, we're not a superpower. We are peers with Britain, with Germany, with these other world powers, who, by the way, will be fighting each other in the First World War 14 years later.
Yeah, so, that's another interesting fact there, I think. Yeah.
Yes. So one is you're reading about Americans, and we are peers with these other nations. Two is it really is. There's really, to me, again, I mentioned survival. It really is a story of survival. But what's so fascinating is it's such a great lesson in coalitions. You know, these Westerners who are going to, again, who will be fighting each other, murdering each other, and what, a decade and a half later on, literally come together and they work as a united team, which is amazing. Yeah. And the Chinese, you're on their home turf. You have the Chinese army, which is really, you know, the head of it is, well, the head of the nation is obviously the Empress Dowager. That's her name, Empress Dowager. She's leading the nation. The army is there, and the boxers are this unruly new sect of I don't know. How would you describe them? This is the population which is really, really unhappy the way things are changing in China.
Yeah, they're definitely a nationalist movement. These are people who, they don't like the modernization they see taking place. Technology is changing. You know, parts of China still living very much like they had 500 years earlier. They're not a modern nation. And you also have you have some drought. You've had some hard crops. You've had economic trouble. And because of the changing economy, a lot of businesses are becoming obsolete. And so people are, you talk about a population that's also very primitive, in the sense that they believe in what we would describe as magic or mysticism. They do not see things objectively, logically. They don't quite understand the cause of the effect. When they interpret bad times as rejection and anger by their gods, therefore they have to react. And you get into the whole notion of mandate of heaven. They look at tough times as kind of a cue from their gods that the power should change. Whoever is in power should be overthrown, and there should be a struggle, and whoever the gods favor will rise to the top and take control. So you've got this kind of setting in the 1890s, and the boxers are kind of a combination of a couple of different groups. What you have, like the Big Sword Society, you have Fists of Harmony that had originated out of China. And they practice martial arts, which is where the whole notion of boxer, the term boxer, comes from. You see them jumping around, flying around, fists going everywhere, because they would meet in groups and exercise as a group. They are, I'd say they're probably as much of a spiritual or almost religious organization as they are a political organization. In fact, the boxers, when they go into combat, will carry little badges or pieces of paper on them that they thought would protect them from bullets, because they believe as long as they are practicing their martial art, the spiritual aspect of their martial art properly, they can't be hurt by bullets, that they will be protected. Their gods will protect them. They're going to learn that doesn't work.
Yes, they are.
But this is kind of the mindset of the boxers. Now they're not very well armed. They're not very well trained, very ad hoc. But at least when it comes to the first relief expedition led by the British Admiral Seymour, they're actually are very effective with guerrilla warfare tactics, ambushes. Now, compared to the Imperial troops who will later fight with them, the Imperial troops are well armed. And they've got, compared to the Boxers, very good training. But they also have some kind of mystical beliefs, I guess you could say. They don't quite understand it. They've got modern equipment, much of which they're buying from the Germans, but don't quite understand the science behind the technology. You know, for example, they would often, they fired at the Allied troops, they'd shoot over the Allies' heads. And they would later discover it's because the Chinese soldiers were elevating their rear sights to like 1,000 meters because their belief was it gave the bullet more power. Not quite, you know, and not understanding how that really worked. So they've got this kind of mystical belief tied in with that.
It reminds me of reading about the Boxers. So a couple things. One thing that it really reminded me of is when I teach American military history about, I was reminded of how the colonists, how they would describe how the American Indians, how they would fight. Because you know, the Indians were very individualistic, like the Boxers. There was no Western discipline. When they went out to fight, they got in a group, went out there, fought, and they would leave. And the chieftain's there, you know, he would maybe direct, basically every man for himself. And the Boxers seemed like all this pent up energy, undisciplined energy, and they would go out there and, you know, they could shoot off a lot of rounds, but they didn't know how to aim. Like I said, they would shoot too high. So, but the fact was they had a huge in terms of quantity, thousands of Boxers, and they were such a. You mentioned too that they're also a political movement, or you know, they're a spiritual movement with political aims. They had so much pent up energy, and I guess they really suggested they were such an internal threat that even the Empress she acquiesced to them. They wanted to get rid of the foreigners because the foreigners are taking their jobs, right?
Right. Yeah. But she'd rather kind of join them or side with them with the idea she could use them to expel the Boxers, or excuse me, expel the Western forces. And the Boxers want to get rid of foreign influence. She also doesn't want the Boxers turning on her.
Yes.
So, you know, initially they've got this kind of, they've got a similar agenda, you know, so it seems like they could come together. It makes sense that they would come together on this.
And you and I had this discussion that they had similar aims, similar goals. Those goals might overlap, but they're two different. They're two distinct bodies with their own purpose, their own missions. It's like Britain and United States during World War II. True, we're fighting the Allies, but we did not have the same aims. We were not fighting to restore Britain's colonies. So to me, when I saw the Boxers were this pent up energy. It's going to go out one way. And the Emperor's like, Empress is, if we let it go with the foreigners, it's not going to bite us, but it's going to be biting someone. Yeah. Is that fair to say?
I think so. Because like I said, you've got the Boxers united around a very nationalistic agenda, very anti-foreigner, anti-Christian, and they want all these things thrown out of their nation. I mean, to the point they're willing to kill, almost ceremonially mutilate these people. The Empress Dowager, her agenda is her power.
Yes.
And so, you know, now again, that's also, they can unite on the anti-foreign sense, but otherwise they have different goals there. She's about herself. She's about controlling the emperor. She's about trying to control the political situation to keep their dynasty in power.
Yeah. So she acquiesces and she gives. It's so interesting because either you go to war or you don't. Well, she kind of straddles the fence. She gives, without going fully into war, but she tasked the Chinese army to support the Boxers. And going back to we talked about before about coalition warfare, how these Western nations, who ultimately some do not like one another. The Russians and the Brits do not like one another, but they work together. They actually do it. And the irony is the Chinese, you're on their home turf. Here is with their army and their boxers who are also Chinese. They're really not unified. And according to Preston in the book, the Chinese military is not fans, or some of the Chinese military are not fans of the boxers at all. They seem as sloppy, undisciplined, probably going to get these guys killed in combat. So to me, I just found it really fascinating that the boxers are this real threat to the queen, to the empress. She's got to do something with them. She tries to support them, but she's also, you could tell she's a good politician. There's some wiggle room in there because during the siege, they send letters back to the Westerners. So, basically things are not as bad as they look, right? You're telling these Westerners that their bullets are flying past their head every day. It's not as bad as it looks. We're calming things down.
Well, the Westerners initially think that the Empress and the Imperial troops are going to be on their side. They see them as kind of neutral players in this. So she's very successful at having pointed the Boxer anger toward directly at the foreigners. And she's kind of using them as a weapon.
Yeah.
And as you said, a lot of Chinese governors within the Chinese Empire didn't care for the Boxers. They were seen as a regional rebellion. They came out of the Northwest. Southeast China has a very good economic relationship with the West. A lot of the governors didn't want to see that end. They don't mind the modernization. In fact, the emperor at the time, Quan Zi, if I'm pronouncing his name right, he once it kind of is leaning towards modernization, but the Empress Dowager Zhu Si, again, if I'm pronouncing the name correctly, she's able to kind of usurp power from him, arrest him, because there's a very strong base in Peking that is very pro-tradition, anti-West, anti-Christian. She can tap into that because she was not supposed to be the ruler. She was a concubine of a previous emperor who has usurped political control because she can tap into the wants, the desires, the agendas of some of the other political players in Peking. And this is how she's kind of risen to the top. So like I said, she's all about really herself and what it takes to keep her in position. She's very effective at this. And, she survives this whole thing.
Shockingly, yeah.
Yeah, she survives it,
Yeah, she did survive it. At the end, there's the second attempt to rescue, and that's a real success. And again, for the audience, we're going to go into the first attempt, but there are literally two attempts. First one's a failure. Second one is a real success. And if you go on Google, type up Boxer Rebellion, you'll see all these photos of these Western nations charging into the cities to Peking, all these super high walls. That really was the second attempt. And they go in, they literally take the capital. And as they take the capital, that the Empress, she takes her whole retinue and they leave. They was like 700 miles to the southeast. They escape.
Yeah, she's out of there. She takes off in the dead of night and leaves the Boxers, her army, everybody else to defend the city because she's gone.
What I found really, really interesting in this book is actually near the conclusion. And what I found really, really fascinating is the Westerners there, according to Preston, the rivalry between the Westerners is so big, so deep that even though they have diplomatic relationships with China, they're not there with China. They're there to spy on one another to ensure that they're not getting a competitive edge over another in a foreign land.
Yeah. Well, a lot of nations have been kind of seeking to insert influence into China for about a good 50 or 60 years or longer at this point, for the last 100 years up to this point. Japan had already been at war with China and had taken over a lot of territory from them. China, of course, Russia and Japan are going to be at war with each other within 5 years of this conflict. China itself had been losing influence in the southeast to the French and to the British. The Americans are arguing for an open door policy where everybody, because people see China as a market. They have no industry at this point. They're economically, like I said, they're out of the Middle Ages, and everybody else has become very modern, very industrialized. And You have some nations like Britain and America that see an economic market. I think you see other nations like Germany and Russia and Japan that see, territory to be conquered, controlled, colonized. You've got the United States that is just finished up the Spanish-American War and kind of emerged on the international scene, a rising industrial power that is really kind of, like you said, a peer with everybody else, although maybe not quite recognized by everybody else yet as a legitimate player in all this. Of course, the Brits are an established empire. But the Brits themselves, well, of course, America, let me backtrack a bit with the Spanish-American War. The United States is also caught up with dealing with the Filipino War in the Philippines, a territory they had just taken from Spain. And Britain is also still in about the middle of their Boer War.
Yeah, South Africa, right?
South Africa. So they're fighting the Dutch settlers who won independence from Britain. And you've also got a lot of contention between Germany and Britain, because Germany has been a rising imperial power. Keep in mind, Germany is still a new nation at this point.
That's right. Franco-Prussian War unites all of Germany.
Yeah, so they're still, they're very fresh, and they've been trying to insert influence in Africa, coming to heads with the British. And so the British and the French are seeing each other a little more as allies, although they're traditional enemies, vying for dominance in the world. This Western coalition, they really, like I said at the start of this, have a lot of different agendas. But suddenly, especially in the legations, that diplomatic quarter of Peking, all that falls to the wayside, because then it's a matter of survival.
Yeah. So, Tom, in terms of survival, let's talk about the first attempt to rescue the Westerners. And that's the Seymour expedition. Mm-hmm. And Seymour is a admiral. He's a British admiral, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And I think was it several thousand soldiers? I think it's like 2,000 soldiers. Is that correct?
It's not large. Yeah, I don't have the number off the top of my head. I can look that up. But yeah, it's a relatively small force. Again, they're not expecting the imperial troops to be involved. So imperial troops are seen as kind of a neutral player in this. Seymour would later state that time was of the essence to him. In fact, he thought it was better that he just try to do his best. Well, he thought he'd be judged fairly if he did fail. He's thinking back to the trouble that Britain had with in India with the Sepoy Mutiny, and he didn't want any innocent civilians killed. So he decides to take the risk to move up there to rescue them. And if it failed, he thought he'd rather be judged for trying to do everything that he could to succeed, as opposed to sitting around and waiting and doing nothing. Because a lot of historians that I've read I think are a little harsh on Seymour. I mean, yeah, the expedition wasn't a success, but it's not to say that mistakes weren't made, but just even the fact that he was able to get them back and they weren't wiped out, I think speaks well for the for how well the Allies fought trying to get in there and trying to get back, because they're doing this by railroad.
So for the audience here, they're at Tietsen, is that right? Tietsen. Yeah, is that 70 miles? I think it's roughly 70 miles.
80 miles from Peking.
Okay, so he has roughly 2,000 soldiers. He has to hurry up because he's getting letters saying that they're being surrounded. They are surrounded, being under siege. And for the audience here, these messages are barely getting out. I mean, they're sending messenger boys out there to send these letters, and some of these guys are getting caught and brutally massacred. I mean, cut open, parts of the body cut off. I mean, it's really disgusting, brutal. What the
Boxers do to people. They cut off hands, they cut off feet, they cut off heads, they disembowel people.
Eye gouging. I mean, it's awful. So the message gets out to Seymour. Hurry, get up here. So he takes these soldiers. He takes a force. I think it's roughly 2,000 people. And remember, we're talking June now, right? June, summer. Yeah. And for the audience here, if you ever been in a military again in the summer, it sucks. it is miserable. So he takes his force, and remember, this is the Western Army. This is the army that has rifles and we have rifles. You have he has some cannon, and not a lot, but light cannons. But that requires ammunition. That requires logistic train. So they get on an actual train and go north, slowly move up north with this force. Except the train has to stop every mile because they're under attack. They're being
tracks are torn up, which they did expect. He takes laborers with him. He's expecting to repair the train as they go forward. But the damage is more intensive than what they realized. They would repair, go a couple miles, repair. They're getting bogged down. The Boxers are destroying local water supplies, and these are steam engines.
Yeah.
Then where they really realize they've bitten off more than they can chew is where the track behind them is getting torn up.
So literally they're being isolated every mile. The tracks in front are being cut, the tracks in the rear are being cut. And for the audience, when they're repairing these tracks, they could be under attack. So the soldiers are constantly on guard, shooting, engaging the enemy every second of the day. And what happens is they just can't continue. I can't remember, was it 10, 20 miles north? He has to stop and turn around because they're accruing casualties, and they have to do a fighting retreat back.
They do, yeah. Well, and in fact, it gets to a point they have to abandon the train. And they load the wounded up on boats. The railroad track kind of more or less parallels the Peiho River, and they decide that the train, they just aren't going to be able to take the train back. And so they load everybody up on the wounded on boats. They commandeer some boats, and they're walking back. And it looks like they're thinking they're going to get wiped out. They're running out of medicine. They're running out of food. They're running out of ammunition. And they stumble across a Chinese fort that they didn't know was there. And this thing is loaded with literally hundreds of thousands of rounds of ammunition,
medicine, everything.
It's got everything they need. And they're able to take the fort because it wasn't that heavily defended. And that's their lifeline right there.
So already the Boxer Rebellion, talk about chaos, a cascading effect, just cascading effects of disorder, of losing control. The besiegers send notes, hey, we need rescue. The rescue team goes up, they get their butt kicked. They have to go back, and now the Western powers are sending messages back to their homes. Hey, we need support here. But you mentioned earlier, there's a world stage here. The Americans are fighting in the Philippines, so they're already bogged down. The British are fighting the Boer War, which at this point, it's not going very well. No, it's not. So given the urgency and the priorities, Peking, that, again, it's like a blip on the radar, and more resources start coming into China to Tientsin. And by the way, that city where Seymour started is also under siege. The Boxer Rebellion is not just Peking, it's all around the country. Is that right?
Well, it's primarily in northeast China. It's around, they're besieging Peking. They've attacked the allies there that come in through the Peiho River. You've got Tientsin, which is kind of the major city just to the west of the mouth of the Peiho River, where if you're traveling to Peking at that time, you've got to dock in in a bay. You've got to get on a lighter ship that takes you into the river, then takes you in the Tako and Tonga cities, which are two cities at the mouth of the river. And then you would take a train, again, about 2 hours by train to actually then to get to Peking. So it's a complicated route. And, also with the technology at the time, it takes these nations, it's going to take some time and some planning to get troops from Europe to China, or even from the Philippines to China, or even from India to China. It takes time. It's going to take time to get there. And so Seymour, knowing this, chances he risks the rescue attempt, it fails. And then you talk about escalating, cascading chaos. Everybody in Peking who was awaiting to be rescued, they're not getting rescued. So
yeah, I mean, they're literally they're isolated. And for the audience, you got these quarters here. Again, the actual diplomatic quarter I just looked at the book before we did this, was 3/4 of a mile, and not length, but is it
Square,
square? Yeah.
Square shaped section.
Yeah. So they're losing ground. Almost in the beginning, they're losing ground a lot. I mean, quarter by quarter, building by building, because you got the Boxers, you have the Army surrounding them, pushing in, and you have limited supplies, and the supplies are usually for the diplomats and their families. Now you have several thousand Chinese converts who are trapped inside the walls. And audience, when I say walls, these walls are what, 20, 30 feet tall? I mean, they're enormous.
And
walls.
thick too.
Yeah.
They're thick walls. Again, this is medieval style siege warfare defenses that they have. I mean, the Tartar wall that the Marines are defending, it's like 2-3 stories tall.
It's enormous. Go on Google and check out the photos. It's amazing. So in essence, Seymour's release or attempt expedition fails. It takes a matter of weeks, but the Westerners start getting more and more troops, and by August, I mean the quarters, they're surviving. They're barely surviving, and I swear, I think I read I think they're shooting at what, 20 to 30 rounds a day. That's all they were doing. Or
they're trying to be. They want to preserve the ammunition, of course, because they've got a few. You read it in Preston's book. That one of the American diplomats' kids was like running out into town and stealing supplies and smuggling it back in, like because rebellious 15-year-old kid who's doing this. And they are getting some supplies. There are some Chinese that are friendly to them, so they get a little bit here, they get a little bit there. But I mean, they're on some lean rations. They're slowly eating their horses. Ugh. That's the main meat supply,
and dogs.
They've got some rice that's not in good shape, but they're eating it. They've got I guess some canned stuff. I remember I forget the woman's name, but it was kind of a sad situation because some of these ladies have babies. There's some newborns in there, and she's like got one hen that lays like one egg a day, and so she's kind of on rotation giving the egg to these mothers to try to feed them and their baby, but it's not enough. And some of the newborns die because they just can't get the nutrition they need.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tough for them in there. But they don't fall apart. They organize. And they've got a system. They come from cultures and these are diplomats. So they understand systems. They understand organization. And that's what they do. They figure out a chain of command. They form a committee of laundry. They have other people working as nurses, medics, aides, and they basically set up kind of a protocol of how we're going to survive this. How do we make the most out of our supplies to survive this, to stay clean, to make bandages, to make sandbags? I mean, you have women they're using their drapes to stitch them together to make sandbags. They have men that are going out and rebuilding barricades on a daily basis to hold the Boxers and the Imperial troops off.
And they're constantly under fire. I mean, so audience, imagine you're literally bullets coming in every couple of minutes of the day or a minute of the day. It's a constant barrage. Some nights are worse than others.
But buildings are being set on fire.
Yeah.
What they're I think the Red Lanterns, which was kind of their female auxiliary of the Boxers, would go out and start fires within the city and some of the buildings. In fact, they set fire to their library, which a lot of people said, this had documents in it from the Chinese dynasties going back thousands of years, some of which were permanently destroyed because the Boxers set it on fire. They're putting up with a lot basically every day. Mentally, these people are cracking because they're not getting the sleep, they're not getting the food, they're under a lot of stress, and they're fighting this notion that they're doomed. That's what fascinating about these people in legations is fighting this notion of impending defeat. They're not giving up. They're going to hold out hope. And now, again, you see the different attitudes. They talk about the Americans and the Brits that were working very hard, kind of similar minds, similar cultures. How do we stay organized? We keep fighting for survival. And some of the people there wrote in their diaries how a lot of the French and the Italians were there, like, it's all lost. And instead of working, they're sitting around trying to finish off their supply of wine before the boxers kill them.
Yeah.
Sitting around drinking wine all day.
If you like this content and want to hear other things like it, head on over to the website at blackmarketleadership.com. That's blackmarketleadership.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, and you can even create a free members profile